Ladies and gentlemen, it's day 53 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Let's just jump on ahead into our game and get started. So I think this is our first Spanish opponent. Gabriel, I can't really pronounce Spanish. Hispalensis. And now, I didn't quite say so until now, but today we will be trying out the English opening. I did ask a couple of days ago whether you guys would be interested in seeing me playing the English opening. And honestly, I think I would like to start playing it at least. I didn't get a lot of feedback, but one of you guys did come back to me and tell me you might be interested in this, so I'll go on ahead and play it today. I haven't had time to look very deeply at the theory here though. So our opponent might even be better prepared, but if he is, we will go on ahead and look at the analysis, and then hopefully we can learn something. Here what I'm looking at is capturing, and our opponent has two options here. We could play this in a Catalan-esque style, I guess, by giving up the c-pawn. But I'm not quite familiar with the Catalan, so we might as well capture and get this imbalance here. Which honestly might favor us long term, I'm not quite sure. At least the imbalance tends to mean there is something to play for. What I'm looking at now is knight to e2 here. But honestly, it might not quite convince me. The reason I'm looking at this move is because in this position d4 seems a bit scary. But why is it scary? It's scary because us capturing looks somewhat awkward. So then why don't we just, or honestly, if they push and we take here and get this, we might be able to push past the pawn. I'm not quite sure here, but I'm not seeing a downside to this move as long as we don't recapture if they go here. And then we can get to castling as quickly as possible. And I think that should be okay here. We get pinned. So what's our best move looking like here? We could just move out of the pin, I think. But then this move, and they pry our horses apart. So honestly, I'm not quite sure here as to what we should do. Which options do we have? We could just play this simple move here, which also does take away this potential knight square in the future. I'm expecting this to come back here. I think this is just a slight improvement of our position. And then we can consider our next move afterwards. which might just be castling. And then we can get our rook to e1 and then move our queen to break this pin here. But they move back, and I guess our opponent is trying to argue. We have created a weakness here, and they might go up here like this, which is quite well played by our opponent. But now do we have this move though? It applies pressure to this and this. But I think we might prefer going here first. Castling, our opponent will generate this threat. Then this defends and hits the bishop. If the bishop moves, we might have this move, capturing the pawn. And I think that's an okay position. That's going to deal with our opponent's center pressure right then at least, because currently we are a bit cramped for space. We get this move, which was expected. Let's play up here and hit their bishop. They still haven't castled, so if we do get to open the position here, I think I wouldn't quite mind, because that might be good for us. If we get this, let me try to calculate this. There is obviously this move, but what happens here, here, here? Here. Then we do have this fork. So honestly, I think this is pretty good for us. And we might even be able to start out with this knight, maintaining our defense of the h3 pawn, while taking their pawn. I am expecting this knight here to capture us, in which case the order doesn't quite matter, but I think I like this because we keep this defense as long as possible. And now we might even be able to drop back and argue we are up a pawn, but then g5 is an option for our opponent. Trying to dislodge our knight. We might have h4 at some point, so our opponent doesn't threaten our h pawn. We would like to develop our bishop as well. This diagonal seems quite interesting, or we might play this or this and get it up to d2 here, and potentially reposition onto c3, protected by our pawn. I'm not quite sure as to what the best option is in that regard, but we will see, because our opponent has not quite made their move either. It might our move here might be dependent on our opponent's move. There might even be g4 for us, but that does create a weakness. Now this is an interesting move though. Our opponent is trying to trade knights here. If we go here and takes, then this is potentially an idea. But what happens if we get this, this, and we just push h4? I think we might just be up a pawn, and our opponent will have no center pawns, and we can push d4 for space and get our pieces out, and then play on the open c-file, which honestly looks quite interesting to me at least. it seems to be an optimistic position. The alternative I'm looking at here is this queen move, which does threaten a capture here, winning a pawn. But in this position here, what happens after this move? Oh no, this is no good, because they can't take still, because this is now... Yeah, it's still a fork there. So honestly, I might prefer this queen to b3 move, keeping the tension for one more move, and if our opponent does take... Or what I am realizing here though, is they don't have to take our knight, they could jump in here, and then this bishop can have discoveries here. So instead we might just take the knight and play up a pawn, which looks quite okay to me. So do we play h4 here, or do we go for another move? Honestly, I think this plan of action seems to be good here. And then we can play our bishop up, target this pawn, or potentially lock it in place and come out like this. Now this bishop here, our light squared bishop, is quite weak now, but that's simply because all our pawns are currently on dark squares, save the a2 pawn. We have to make a mental note here. Our opponent's king rather, is still quite weak, but they do move towards castling, it seems. There might be an argument here for playing this move instead of playing two squares up, simply because we have very little control over the light squares. But then this pawn is going to be left weak, and it's already somehow targeted by two pieces if this bishop moves. So instead I think this is a candidate move here. I'm not quite fond of the idea of b3, because this bishop might slide around here. But then we could just trade off like this, and our worst piece would be out of the game. No, we can't move here because of this bishop still. So I guess we'll go like this. There might be an argument for playing a3 here, but then it might take too long for us to develop our last bishop, so I think we might not go for that plan. This move, I mean, it threatens a pawn here, but apart from that, I'm not seeing a whole lot. If we go here and our opponent castles, this doesn't actually seem all that bad. This is not a good response, but here our opponent could just play rook to b8 here. I'm not immediately convinced by the move, but at the same time it will get us closer to connecting our rooks. This might not be the best move at all, but we'll play up here first, and then probably play for d4. If our opponent goes here, we can take like this and then take, or even come up here, and if they take, our bishop, we can come back and hit theirs. They do play the rook move. I think we'll go for this. I'm realizing a downside of our queen move here is we no longer control this d3 square as well. So if we come out with our bishop here, our opponent might consider pushing. But that might not be the best move though. Well, let's get our development finished and play on the c-file. We can always drop back here with our queen to e2 here, if our opponent plays a move like this, trying to skewer our pieces. Now there might be an argument here for locking the pawn in place. I think we might go for that idea. Our opponent seems like they want to play with space here on the queen side. I'm not too fond of this because it either gives our opponent a lot of space, opens up their bishop, or forces us to double up our pawns and undouble theirs. So this might be an okay move, I think. And then we can play on the c-file. If this is played, I think we just take. Now this does threaten this move, which I was talking about. But I don't think we are forced to move back here though. Because let's say we play a move like this, and they go here, we just move back, and if they trade, we just capture with our king, and there is not really a threat along this diagonal. So let's come out here and grab the c-file. Now most of our pieces here are on the dark squares. So this is a good trade for our opponent, because our light squared bishop does serve a better purpose considering our pawn structure, at least on the king side. On the queen side we have light squared pawns. It might be a bit difficult to take advantage of that trade here, where we are going to be weakened on the light squares. We still have our queen and our rooks that can fight for them. And our pawn structure is quite solid, so the rooks can't really come in here, save for the c-file, but then we just trade it down. This bishop here is well placed. We can just force trades. And I think we should be good here. If our opponent ever captures, we have this as well. Well, this was an unexpected move. I'm curious here as to whether we have any ideas after this. I don't quite see any, but we might trade here actually and come up here. Or actually this might allow us to double up like this, because our opponent no longer looks into our position here. Our bishop is going to get traded off, so let's do it in our terms and force this, and then we might have much greater control over this c-file. The rook can't really slide on over here. This square, it is covered, so our opponent might try to play here. If the queen comes in, I think we should be happy to trade, because we are up material and have a better structure. If the rook comes, well, it's not really much of a threat, is it? Let's slide on over with our second rook here. I'm expecting a capture, and then we shall maintain the c-file. We might even be able to force our way in here with queen to c4 and come on down and maybe force a queen trade. But let's spend our time here to double check. Our bishop is currently in jail, I guess. If we play here, honestly, this might be an even better move, threatening both the pawn and the queen trade. And it might be a bit more difficult to miss this idea when the pawn is threatened. What could our opponent play in response here? I'm not quite sure as to what a good move would be. So I would like to come down here to a6, or up here rather, and then we might even be able to play our rook here if needs be instead of our queen, depending on the situation. I want to make sure we maintain some time in our clock here, because we don't want to lose under time pressure. And now if we do get the queens off the board, I think we might want to push our structure forwards a bit, so we don't have targets for our opponent's bishop. A3 might be an idea, but it's not going to help us a lot, I think. This favors us for now, this standoff on the queen side. Now if our opponent plays here to dodge a queen trade, I was looking at ideas like pinning this rook and threatening f3, which I think would work, but our opponent plays the bishop back. Can we come in like this? What happens if our opponent plays the rook up? This move basically cuts our connection if we play for this square. But now I think we pick up, no, we don't pick up the rook. It can come back here. But then we might come here and threaten the bishop, perhaps, and a queen trade, which honestly I think should favor us. So let's play for this check. I'm pretty sure this is first. Or this might be a move as well, actually, but as I mentioned, the queen trade looks nice, and in this case we win the bishop. So I'm expecting rook to e8, and then this should help us simplify. Yeah, they can't really try to avoid it, but our opponent misses our idea. And now we pick up a rook with check. And this should probably win us the game here. Yes, our opponent does resign, and we win 7 ELO points today. Thanks a lot for the game, Gabriel. Thanks for the game. I see we still made a blunder and a mistake in this game today, so let's have a look at how we should have played differently. I'm quite happy we won our first English opening here, because I would like to start playing this 1c4 move a bit. I would like to get some feedback if you guys, for example, only play 1d4 and would like to see that instead, to see openings and get feedback, or rather at least see me in play the positions you play instead, then please do give me some feedback on that. I'm looking at 1c4 now because first of all I would like to learn a new opening, but mostly it's because we now have the option of coming into a reverse Sicilian with 1c4, and we have an option of transposing into a lot of 1d4 openings still. Either way here, let's jump on ahead into the game review and have a look. We played with an accuracy of 83.6 today, and our opponent played with 74.3. I'm quite curious here as to what the best response was. This was all good. The moves did make sense to me, but apparently this was not the critical approach. I am going to have a look at chessbook and maybe build a repertoire surrounding the English opening as well, in which case this might come into play in this symmetrical-ish English opening. I did want to avoid putting the bishop here, or the knight rather, because I wanted to keep this diagonal open, and I wanted to play for the same idea our opponent did, namely pushing the d-pawn. But in this position here, capturing was best, but we should have pushed here, I guess because this was a good move, which was what I was worried about, as I mentioned. I would like to have a look at the position's transformation after this move. I guess it would be an IQP versus an IQP. And this does look quite balanced. We already exert some pressure on their pawn, and they exert some pressure on ours. We didn't go for this equal position though. We went up here. What does the game review say? The engine here is a bit more powerful, so we might get some better analysis. This is not the best move. We should have still pushed, but now we are in an okay spot. The worst we've been was when our opponent could push this after we went knight to e2. Now this was good for us apparently. Let's have a look at this line here. I guess the computer is trying to argue this is positionally dominant. What happens if we just get captures? Then EX, and of course our opponent's king is going to be in a world of trouble. Yeah, I'm seeing this now. This makes a lot of sense, and they might even be forced to castle queenside, which would be a massive weakness for our opponents. Or rather, their king would be exposed. They don't have a c-pawn to hide behind. This does look quite promising. What we took here, which was indeed still a good move. I'm curious though which knight capture was best. Yeah, we did pick the best knight. This says, oh, it actually went up to 0.7, but now we got 0.5. and this said 0.7, 0.8. Well, they captured, we went for this. There was this intermezzo here though, which is a really interesting move here. It cuts off this coordination here. And what happens if this is played? Apparently doubled pawns here is good. Or what did I miss? Or we should have captured the bishop. If we played here and they went for our pawn, then we have this fork again. Okay. E4 is a move I didn't quite consider because it seems to weaken our position a bit. But it was a really interesting move. It was playable considering numerous circumstances. We had a miss here. Apparently we should have pushed d4 first. Why was this better? We did consider this move, but went for this instead, which, I mean, it's just a one move threat, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. This would have been best, and now the computer argues for e4. Basically just grabbing the center and being annoying because our opponent doesn't have any center pawns. Well, we went like this and this. What did our opponent miss here, by the way? Yeah, they could have blocked this push. And then it might have been a bit difficult to dislodge this bishop. So I guess that's a lot of the reason why. So you can see still with the green arrow here, why our queen move was inaccurate, because it disallowed our desired pawn push. Still, e4 was apparently good. I was not quite convinced by breaking apart our solid structure here, as I thought our plan was quite straightforward, playing up a pawn here and just capturing the c-file and being quite comfortable. This was good for us. I'm trying to understand this move. I guess it argues we have this if they try to trade off bishops, but why not just come over to the c-file first if that's the case? Why would we want to defend this pawn on e3? Now I'm realizing because the computer had a different plan in mind here. It wanted to play behind those pawns here and not on the c-file. In which case it does make sense putting the rooks behind the pawns. Here we also had a slight inaccuracy. We should have centralized our queen apparently. They can't quite hit it. But this does look a bit scary. I would be worried about losing our queen here. But this move I guess is good because now our opponent doesn't threaten this because we can capture back with our bishop and not the queen. So in hindsight this does make sense because it keeps our powerful light squared bishop on the board. We went here instead, we went back. I didn't quite see the idea here of hitting this pawn. But if we went here and they captured, we captured, they could have just played b6 rather and defended it. Our threat here was apparently this move still. And why is this bad? Let's have a look here. Is it just because it's difficult to unpin this bishop? honestly somewhat confused here. Let's say our opponent plays here, hitting our bishop and unpinning themselves. Bishop to d2, and the computer argues this is just decisively winning. I guess it's because this was a way of forcing the material trade, I guess, and considering we had such a dominant position already, those 3 pawns here are frozen against our 2 here, and we had 2 pawns more in the center. I guess that's what the computer is trying to tell us. At least it does make sense to me. Well, we went back here. This move was not the best. It allowed us to trade like this. And here we traded rooks. King to g2 was apparently best. This was also quite decent. This move seems to win. But why? I thought this was not as winning. Because we have this move. I'm honestly unsure as to whether I would have spotted this in-between move. Now our opponent can take here, but then we play up a bishop. And they can take here, but then they lose the game like this. So I guess I saw a lot of the ideas here of this a6 move, or queen a6 to a8. And I didn't quite see this powerful move. Well, here we did win, and yeah, I'm quite happy with this. As I mentioned, please do come back to me and tell me whether you think the English opening is interesting or not, or at least whether you would want to see me playing it going forwards in this, on this journey rather. Well, once again, thanks a lot for the game, Gabriel from Spain. Thanks to you viewers for watching to the end of the video. This has been our game for today, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye!